Today, in his lifetime, this long-cherished wish had finally been fulfilled. Xiao Ran looked at the group before him with a helpless smile. "You're all too kind. You're embarrassing me," he said. "No, this is what you deserve, Mr. Xiao Ran," Mr. Ubuyashiki replied earnestly. Xiao Ran didn't argue. Ubuyashiki was a man of principle. Even if he protested that thanks weren't necessary, Ubuyashiki wouldn't be swayed. It was fine. After all, by all reason, Xiao Ran had saved most of the people present. Had he not appeared, many of them would have died in the near future. "Please, Mr. Xiao Ran, take the main seat," Ubuyashiki urged, offering his hand. Xiao Ran took it and sat in the seat of honor. "Would you like to say a few words?" Ubuyashiki asked. "No, formalities aren't my thing. Let's eat." Xiao Ran waved the request away. A rumble answered him from nearby. He turned and saw a girl with 3 long pink braids blush and bow her head in embarrassment. Kanroji Mitsuri. Seeing her, Xiao Ran grinned. "Everyone's hungry. Let's eat." Ubuyashiki smiled and clapped. The wooden doors on either side of the room opened, and a group of kimono-clad dancers glided forward to perform. Xiao Ran hadn't expected a show, but at least the dancers wore normal makeup, not the terrifying, heavily painted geisha faces he'd feared. That would have ruined the appetite. The luncheon lasted over 2 hours. At first, people were a bit reserved in his presence, but a few drinks and Xiao Ran's gentle manner soon loosened them up. By the second half, the event had turned into a drinking contest. One by one, the Hashira, except for a few, passed out where they sat and began to snore. Sanemi Shinazagawa's snores were the loudest, like a whole construction crew at work. When the noise settled down, Ubuyashiki, who had only had a little to drink, asked Xiao Ran, "Would you come with me for a moment?" Xiao Ran nodded and called over Kanai, who had also stayed sober, and Kanroji Mitsuri. The 3 of them went into an adjacent room. "Please, sit," Ubuyashiki said, motioning to Xiao Ran. His wife, Ubuyashiki Amane, nodded and produced an exquisite wooden box, placing it on the table between them. "This is a small gift from me to you, Mr. Xiao Ran. Please accept it." Xiao Ran opened the box. Inside lay several neatly arranged documents, share transfer agreements already signed by Ubuyashiki. If Xiao Ran signed, these shares would be his. There were shares from 6 publicly listed companies. The total value was at least 10 billion yen. Below the agreements lay a bank card. Based on the other gifts, the balance was surely substantial. "This is too much," Xiao Ran protested, pushing the box back. "Please take it back." "No," Ubuyashiki said firmly. "This gift is nothing compared to what you have done for the Demon Slayer Corps. Please accept it, or I will not be at ease." He pushed the box back across the table, his expression sincere. Seeing how determined he was, Xiao Ran relented. "All right, I'll accept it." Relief spread across Ubuyashiki and his wife's faces. Ubuyashiki then added, "Besides thanking you today, I have an impertinent request I hope you'll grant." Xiao Ran looked up. "What is it?" Ubuyashiki looked to Kanroji Mitsuri, who flushed and looked down. Mr. Xiao Ran, I want to follow by your side and learn from you. I hope you'll allow it." Mitsuri then stepped forward, knelt, and bowed deeply. "I hope to follow beside someone powerful like you, Mr. Xiao Ran. Please." Xiao Ran stared in surprise. Ubuyashiki gave a slight nod, confirming this was Mitsuri's own wish, not something imposed on her. After a moment's thought, Xiao Ran said, "All right, you can follow me. But there are conditions," he added. "I don't like people making decisions on their own. From now on, if you're going to follow me, you must tell me what you want to do before you act. You may only do something if I agree. Do you understand?" "Thank you, Mr. Xiao Ran," Mitsuri beamed. "I will follow your wishes. Please be assured." Xiao Ran nodded inwardly. He had come for a meal and unexpectedly left with both money and a follower. It felt a little awkward. Kanae, sitting nearby, glanced at Mitsuri with a touch of envy. She would have liked to follow Xiao Ran too, but she had a younger sister to care for and couldn't be as free-spirited. On the way back from the Demon Slayer Corps headquarters, Mitsuri shadowed him like a bright, loyal companion. "That's the situation," Xiao Ran told Sonoko later. "Could you buy one more ferry ticket?" He had planned to head straight to the pier and take the ferry back to the mainland, but with Ubuyashiki's generous gift and Mitsuri in tow, he decided to bring her to the Suzuki Villa first. It was only a little past 2 in the afternoon, plenty of time before departure, and Sonoko could handle the ticket. If worse came to worst, he could send Mitsuri back through a teleportation portal. No problem. Leave it to me, Sonoko said, already dialing her phone. In short order, she hung up. Done. Thank you, Mitsuri said politely. No trouble at all. Sonoko laughed. It's nothing. But Mitsuri Nichan, where will you stay when you go to Tokyo? Mitsuri looked to Xiao Ran. You can stay at my house for now. I have a few empty rooms, he offered. Understood, Lord Xiao Ran, Mitsuri replied cheerfully. Kanroji Mitsuri nodded. I already told you. You don't have to call me adult. Xiao Ran gave a helpless smile. Rules can't be broken. In the end, she won. After leaving the Demon Slayer Corps headquarters, Mitsuri even saved his contact name in her phone as Adult. Xiao Ran protested it was unnecessary, but she was stubborn, so he let it be. Conan, sitting on the living room sofa, watched Mitsuri trailing after Xiao Ran with a curious, suspicious stare. That woman seemed off to him. Hey, little brat, what are you looking at? Learning bad habits so young? Came a gruff voice, and a fist thudded into Conan's head. He blinked, hurt and annoyed, and glared at Mori Kogoro. Is this guy addicted to hitting me? Conan fumed. Uncle Mori, don't you think that woman is strange? She's carrying a sword, Conan asked, adopting an innocent tone. What's strange about that? Xiao Ran already said she's from a family of swordsmen, so what? Mori replied, unconcerned. Conan bristled inwardly. She's definitely suspicious. Uncle Mori is so slow to notice things. Conan lowered his gaze and watched the faint reflection in his glasses. As a famous, if fictional, detective, he recognized killers when he saw them. Even the perpetrators from those serial murder cases he'd studied didn't have eyes like hers. He'd seen eyes like that only once before, the silver-haired man in black who'd turned him into this. How could Xiao Ran know someone like her? Was Xiao Ran hiding something? Conan had made the wrong guess. Mitsuri's look came not from killing humans, but from killing demons, two very different things. Her gaze held the weight of a warrior who'd faced monstrous foes countless times. At Kosei Island's largest pier, while they waited for the ferry, Sonoko pulled Xiao Ran aside. Is Sister Mitsuri part of your supernatural circle? She whispered. Sort of, Xiao Ran said. Mitsuri used to be a member of the Demon Slayer Corps. Now that the demons on Kosei Island are gone, she decided to leave with me and Sonoko. Sonoko's eyes widened. The Demon Slayer Corps? You mean people who kill demons? Xiao Ran nodded and gave her a brief summary. The Corps had been fighting demons for centuries. Sonoko listened with a mix of admiration and fear. Oh my goodness, there really were man-eating monsters in this world? I'm so glad my family never ran into any of them. And now they're all gone. How wonderful. Demons on the island are gone, but there are always other threats, Xiao Ran cautioned. This world has never been truly safe. Usually specialized organizations deal with monsters, so ordinary people rarely encounter them. It's best if they never do. Sonoko shuddered at the thought. By 4 p.m., the ferry arrived to pick up the tourists. Boats pulled away from the pier one after another and headed back toward the neon mainland. Kosei Island's silhouette receded until it vanished. On board, people happily recounted their 2-day trip, promising to return for the next holiday. Nearly 2 hours later, the ferry docked at Tokyo. It was already 6 p.m. They all went out to dinner together, then drifted apart afterward. Ran, see you at school tomorrow. Okay, see you tomorrow, Sonoko. Xiao Ran, see you tomorrow. All right, get some rest. They waved and left. Sonoko rode off in her family's car, and then Xiao Ran and Kanroji Mitsuri hailed a taxi after saying goodbye to Kushikawa Shizuka and Ran. Inside the cab, Mitsuri sat very straight next to him, apparently nervous about meeting his family. What's on your mind? Xiao Ran asked, noticing. Mitsuri put her hands together and asked quietly, does adult Xiao Ran live alone or with his parents? If I meet adult Xiao Ran's parents, should I call them uncle and auntie? The driver stole a glance at them in the rearview mirror. Adult? Is that young man some kind of important figure? He wondered. Xiao Ran chuckled. Don't worry, my parents died years ago. I live alone. Oh, Mitsuri blinked, surprised, then quickly apologized, flustered. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. You don't need to apologize, Xiao Ran said. He had long since accepted his parents' death. It had been years. The taxi pulled up in front of his home in Mihua Town. He paid the fare and they stepped out. From inside, a light burned on the first floor. Yoko Okino hadn't left yet. Come in, Xiao Ran said, using his key to open the door. Yoko Okino emerged from the living room with a smile. Boss, welcome home. She lingered a moment on Mitsuri, silently miffed that her flirtatious boss had coaxed home another young woman. You still haven't gone back? Xiao Ran asked as he changed into slippers. Yoko feigned hurt. How heartbreaking. While you were out having fun these past 2 days, I've been dutifully keeping the house for you, boss. All right, enough acting. You're not that convincing, he replied indifferently. Yoko huffed inwardly. Couldn't he say something nice for once? And went back into the living room, pouting. Mitsuri slipped on a fresh pair of slippers and asked, curious, Adult Xiao Ran, who was that just now? Yoko Okino, an idol. She's working for me now, Xiao Ran answered. Mitsuri nodded. Even though the Demon Slayer Corps spent their lives fighting demons, she wasn't ignorant of the outside world. She knew what an idol was. She was simply curious how an idol could be Xiao Ran's subordinate. Did he run an entertainment company? They all sat down in the living room. Xiao Ran turned to Yoko, whose earlier sulk had faded, and asked, How did the thing I asked you to handle go? Yoko brightened and went upstairs for a moment. When she returned, she carried a stack of documents. Here, these are the contracts I brought back from the company. The termination went through. Yoko Okino picked up one of the documents and waved it once. Not bad. Xiao Ran nodded. He wasn't surprised. Given Yoko's current situation, it would be difficult for her to create new value for the company. Spending a fortune on PR for her might not even be recouped. It was better to part ways cleanly. Even if Yoko didn't bring a huge sum, at least the company would make some return. Leaving a contract to stagnate was pointless. Business people cared about profit. They wouldn't cling to something that lost money. This is the acquisition contract, Yoko said. As you ordered, I acquired a small entertainment company. She handed him the paper. Xiao Ran flipped through it casually. The company was tiny. No famous artists, no noteworthy achievements, so the acquisition hadn't cost much. It had been purchased for a mere 4 yen. Then, this is the share transfer agreement, she added, passing another document. Xiao Ran glanced at it and then pushed it back toward her. This needs to be amended. I'm not a vampire. There's no need to transfer 100% of the shares to me. Keep 10% for yourself. That way, you'll still have something of your own. Yoko's eyes widened. She had expected only a salary or an official title for serving as the company's legal representative. She hadn't expected Xiao Ran to hand her shares, let alone as much as 10%. It was a lot. You handled these matters well. From now on, I'll leave the company's operations to you, Xiao Ran said. By the way, artist recruitment. Do you have anyone in mind? She answered confidently. I still have industry contacts. If we offer the right contracts, I can persuade some people to switch. And breach of contract fees? I've thought about that. I'll start with friends whose contracts expire this year. The rest can be discussed more slowly. Yoko had even prepared a list. Everyone on it were artists who might be poachable. None of them were big names. That made sense. Established stars don't jump companies easily, so she hadn't bothered listing those who were impossible to take. Xiao Ran skimmed her list. He didn't recognize any of the names, but that was expected. He didn't know the business well, and since Yoko had done the legwork, he was willing to let her handle recruitment. If she failed, it was only a 600 million yen investment, a trivial loss given his resources. After all, he'd already gifted Mr. Ubuyashiki shares worth over 10 billion yen, and his own bank card held 2 billion in cash. In that light, 600 million was nothing. Mitsuri, that room will be yours, Xiao Ran said, turning on the light and gesturing toward a door. Understood, Xiao Ran-sama? Kanroji Mitsuri replied, bowing with the earnestness only she could manage. Yoko, who had followed them into the hallway, glanced curiously at the girl and wondered about the relationship between her and Xiao Ran. What era was this where people still used a title like Sama? After seeing Mitsuri settled, Xiao Ran checked the time. It was past 9. He told her to get some rest and returned to his room. Half an hour later, he took a shower and came back in clean pajamas. When he opened the door, he found Yoko tucked under the covers, peeking out and waggling a provocative finger at him. This woman was looking for trouble again. Xiao Ran closed the door with a casual smile and walked over. Yoko soon fell asleep from exhaustion after her earlier exertions, though Xiao Ran himself didn't feel tired. He decided to read for a bit. A book appeared in his hand, not conjured, but retrieved from the Infinity Castle, where he stored many things. He settled on the living room sofa and let the quiet night draw him into the book. In the other room, Kanroji Mitsuri tossed and turned. A new bed always made her sensitive. She couldn't fall asleep easily, and the sounds next door didn't help. Seeing Xiao Ran and Yoko together last night had planted a thought in her head, so they had that kind of relationship, making Xiao Ran's lofty image feel suddenly less distant. Drowsiness finally won out, and she dozed off around 1 in the morning. Later, the hallway light clicked on. Xiao Ran came out stretching. Yoko was sleeping soundly. He stifled a smirk and returned to his sofa to finish his book. Morning came quickly. Mitsuri's internal clock woke her at 6. Even though she hadn't been in the Demon Slayer Corps for long, the Corps had trained strict habits into her. Unless she was on a night mission, she was always asleep by midnight and up by 6. She washed quietly, checked Xiao Ran's door, still closed, and went downstairs. Xiao Ran was already awake, sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea and his book. Seeing him, Mitsuri brightened. "Xiao Ran-sama, up so early?" He took a sip and answered, "Early to bed, early to rise." Mitsuri blinked. If she hadn't heard what she had last night, she might have believed him. "Are you hungry?" Xiao Ran asked, closing the book and standing. "Yes," she nodded enthusiastically, rubbing her stomach. Her muscles were denser than a normal person's, 8 times stronger, and that had given her an appetite to match. She'd once been embarrassed by it, but under the guidance of Mr. Ubuyashiki and her time in the Corps, she'd learned to take pride in it instead of hiding it. "Then let's go get breakfast," Xiao Ran said. There was a street near Xiao Ran's place full of small eateries that served breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They weren't fancy, but the food was good, clean, and affordable, the kind of neighborhood places that felt safe. Most shops had only a handful of tables. On busy days, they'd set out a few extra chairs. Xiao Ran came here sometimes, usually to grab something simple and eat it while walking the street. Today, though, he had company. Today, however, Xiao Ran had Kanroji Mitsuri, his little follower, with him. He asked her what she wanted for breakfast, and when they came back, Mitsuri's hands were overflowing with bags of food. Xiao Ran had always known she could eat a lot, but he'd never really grasped just how much until now. Seeing her carrying enough to feed a dozen grown men finally gave him a concrete idea of her capacity. "Is this enough for you?" he asked as she spread the food out across the dining table. It's enough," Mitsuri nodded, but the next sentence left Xiao Ran speechless. "My lord told me you shouldn't eat too much for breakfast, so I'll only eat until I'm about 70% full," she giggled. Xiao Ran stared. 70% full? He glanced at his own plate. His portion was roughly the size of what a normal adult would eat for 2 meals. Substantial, mainly because he didn't have to worry about gaining weight anymore and could indulge. Compared to Mitsuri's mountain of food, his meal was tiny. "It's enough. I just like to eat a bit, mostly to taste things," he said. Mitsuri nodded, seemingly understanding in her own way, then smiled at her pile of food. "I'm going to dig in." Half an hour later, Xiao Ran had already finished. Mitsuri was still going strong. He checked his watch, stood up, and said, "Mitsuri, do you remember what I told you?" "Huh?" Her cheeks stuffed, Mitsuri looked up, then flushed as if something had come back to her. After she swallowed, she answered, "I remember. Xiao Ran-sama said you usually go to school, so I don't need to follow you." "Right, so today, stay home. If you want, you can walk around the neighborhood to get familiar with it, maybe make some friends, but you don't have to come to school." "No, I'll stay here," Mitsuri said, shaking her head. "Suit yourself. Here, take this card, my secondary card. For lunch, you can go to the nearby restaurant or order takeout. There's a restaurant directory with phone numbers by the entrance." He gave her a few more instructions, grabbed his school bag, changed his shoes at the door, and prepared to leave. "Mitsuri, have a safe trip," she called, waving from the entrance. See you tonight," Xiao Ran answered, and left for school. Class 2B at Tayton High School was full of the usual Monday chatter. Students back from a break were comparing how they'd spent their holidays. As Xiao Ran reached the classroom door, someone called his name from behind. "Xiao Ran-jun!" Yotsuya Miko came running up, out of breath, hands on her knees. Take your time, no rush, he said when he noticed her panting. She regulated her breathing, looked up at him, and blurted, Xiao Ran Jun, I need your help. Oh, what's wrong? As he spoke, he glanced over her shoulder and frowned in surprise. Then Miko said urgently, Can I invite you to my house after school today? Sure, come find me when school's out. He nodded without hesitation. Something must be wrong at her place. What exactly he didn't know yet, but he'd find out once he went over. Thank you, Xiao Ranjun, Miko said gratefully, then hurried off toward the neighboring class. Xiao Ran watched her go. 2 huge demons were trailing her, taking on grotesque, attention-grabbing forms. Miko didn't even glance at them. She'd clearly gotten used to it. When he'd first seen Miko, he'd noticed those demons too. He was surprised he could see them now. Last time he wouldn't have. Is it because of the Black Adam entry? Or the Shabak entry, he wondered. It must be both. Both Black Adam's 6 gods' power and Shabak's 6 demon kings' power were mystical entries. They'd given him powers from the spiritual side. Powers that should let a proper god king or demon king perceive spiritual entities like these demons. So it made sense that he could see them. And because Shabak's power included absorbing malevolence, he realized he could literally absorb the malevolence that made up these demons, like eating them. What would be left afterward was uncertain, but he made a mental note. I'll try after school. He went into his classroom. Ding-a-ling, the bell for the final period rang. The teacher packed up and left, and the students began spilling out in little groups. Going home together? Lingmei, let's try that new cake shop. Let's go, Miyagi. Ball practice. Xiao Ran shoved his books into his bag and looked at Sonoko and Ran beside him. Sonoko had invited him to a movie, but he'd already agreed to help Miko, so he declined. Sonoko asked what he was up to, so he told them about Miko. Ran overheard and realized the new transfer student in the next class had spiritual sight. Yotsuya's too pitiful. Xiao Ran, you have to help her, Sonoko said, sympathetic. Having spiritual vision without any way to exercise spirit sounded terrible. Who could imagine living like that? Are you two really coming with me? He asked. Yeah, we can at least help calm Miko down, Sonoko replied, and nudged Ran for support. Ran nodded stiffly. She was terrified of ghosts. The idea of confronting them made her resist, but she'd already agreed. Xiao Ran reassured them. Ordinary people usually couldn't see those demons, and if they couldn't see them, they couldn't be directly harmed. At worst, their life energy would be leached, and that could be replenished by eating. It wasn't ideal, but it wasn't the end of the world. Still, fear nagged at Ran even so. Ran, don't be scared. Sonoko squeezed her arm. The best way to beat fear is to face it, and Xiao Ran's here. Nothing will happen. Ran could only grit her teeth and nod. All right, when we go, you two just stand by and watch. I'll have Mitsuri follow you, Xiao Ran said. He'd already called Kanroji Mitsuri. She might be waiting at the school gate. When they stepped out of Class B, Yotsuya Miko was waiting by the door. Xiaohua left? Xiao Ran noticed that Baihei Chuanhua wasn't with her and asked. I told her to go back first, Miko replied. Yotsuya Miko nodded. Then her eyes fell on Sonoko and Ran, who had come out with Xiao Ran. This is Suzuki Sonoko, and this is Morty Ran, Xiao Ran said, introducing them. Hello, everyone. I'm Yotsuya Miko from Class C next door. Miko greeted them. Hi, Yotsuya. Sonoko smiled and stepped forward, giving Miko a wink. Xiao Ran's already told us about you. We'll help today. Eh? Miko blinked in surprise, then glanced at Xiao Ran. That's very kind of you. Xiao Ran shrugged. They were awfully warm-hearted. He'd heard plenty about them, too. Miko's relief showed on her face. Most people, after hearing about what was happening around her, would probably be terrified and run the other way. The fact that these girls were willing to come help left a very good first impression. Thank you. You're really going to a lot of trouble. No trouble at all. We're classmates, Sonoko said with a smile. Come on, my other friend is waiting for us at the school gate. Xiao Ran had already sensed Kanroji Mitsuri's presence. She was near the gate. Is that Mitsuri? Sonoko asked. Xiao Ran nodded, and the group went downstairs and toward the entrance. At Taitenhai's gate, Kanroji Mitsuri stood out in her striking attire and immediately drew attention from the students, especially the boys, youthful and impressed, couldn't help stealing looks at her. Even though Mitsuri's outfit here was modest compared to other portrayals, her figure and pink hair made an impression. Whispers ran through the crowd. Is that Xiao Ran from Class B, second year? No way. He's got a girlfriend already? Aw, I'm heartbroken. You're overreacting. You're projecting feelings that probably aren't even there. Look how he's surrounded by four beautiful girls. That's terrifying. Maybe it's just friendship. Friendship? My foot. She's holding his arm. Let's see. That's Morty Ran. She won the National Youth Women's Karate Championship. The girl holding his arm is Suzuki Sonoko, the second daughter of the Suzuki family. The one beside her must be Yotsuya Miko, the new transfer to Class C. And that pink-haired girl. What a lineup. Damn it, what do we do? I want to punch him. Go for it, bro. We support you. Xiao Ran felt the crowd's ire as if withering glares, but there wasn't much they could do besides glare. You're here? Let's go, Xiao Ran called to Mitsuri. She waved and hurried over. Xiao Ran, she called, friendly and loud. The group set off toward Miko's house. It wasn't far, so they walked. On the way, Miko sketched out her family situation. She was guarded. There were now 6 evil spirits clinging to her home. 6. They'd started as 2 in the morning, but the number had climbed. So you have a lot of guests at your house? Xiao Ran asked, stressing the word the way you do when you're trying not to be too direct. Yes, Miko said, visibly worn. Some showed up the day before yesterday. Some yesterday. I wonder if more came today. She gave a bitter little laugh. She'd been given the yin-yang eyes and could see spirits, but not the ability to banish them. It felt like cruel irony. It's okay, Miko, Sonoko said, already warming to her. Xiao Ran promised to help, so it'll be fine. Mitsuri nodded. She'd taken down the demon ancestor before. Whatever Miko called guests, Mitsuri trusted Xiao Ran's word. Cheer up, Miko, Ran added from the side, managing to be comforting despite her own fright. Truly angelic, Xiao Ran thought. Miko's gratitude overflowed. Tears welled in her eyes and slipped down her cheeks. The last few days had been rough, and Xiao Ran hadn't even been around until now. She'd been terribly anxious. They reached her house. This is my place, Miko said, unlocking the door and letting them in. It was a typical 2-story Japanese home with a small front and backyard, just enough for drying laundry and a few vegetables, and a tiny attic for out-of-season storage. Each floor was about 105 square meters. It was comfortable. As soon as Xiao Ran stepped into the genkan, he was nearly taken aback. An evil spirit clung to the top of the entrance. Another lurked inside the shoe cabinet. The hallway ahead, including the stairs to the second floor, was crawling with spirits, some standing in the corridor, others clinging to the walls and ceiling. From the genkan alone, he could count at least 10 of them. Had Miko poked a demon's nest? Xiao Ran wondered. How had so many spirits gathered here? Did spirits have their own networks and rumors? A girl who can see us lives here, come by? The idea felt ridiculous. Did you go anywhere last weekend? Xiao Ran asked, stopping the others from entering. Miko thought for a moment. I went to a department store in the food street nearby. Oh, and on Sunday my mom took me to the shrine. I met a kind shrine maiden, and when I left she gave me a small gift. She ran into the house and came back holding a teru teru bozu, a little white charm hung to pray for good weather. Xiao Ran took it, peeled off the outer cloth, and found beneath the stuffing a small slip of paper. When he unfolded it, everyone saw a hasty talisman crudely drawn on it. What does this talisman mean? Sonoko asked, curiosity plain on her face. No one answered. I'll keep it for now and look into it later, Xiao Ran told Miko. She nodded gratefully. Given the situation and the talisman's appearance, the worst-case guess wasn't hard to reach. The recent influx of spirits at Miko's house was probably connected to that charm. We have guests? Miko, why didn't you invite them in? Sonoko said with nervous laughter, trying to make light of the tense, crowded entrance. At that moment, Xiao Ran noticed something odd. Among the swirling, abstract evil spirits at the doorway stood a perfectly ordinary human-shaped spirit. It looked just like a regular person. Yotsuya Miko shook her head, an expression full of complicated feeling. That is my father, she said quietly. Xiao Ran understood. He remembered seeing Yotsuya Miko's father in Miko's memories, a rare kind of spirit who wouldn't actively harm people. Not all spirits were malevolent. Most lost their memories and turned vicious, driven only by instinct, but a sliver of them could remain untouched by malevolence. Miko's father had almost none, less than a tenth of even the least malicious of the surrounding evil spirits. All right, Xiao Ran told the group. Leave the rest to me. Mitsuri, protect them, he added. Understood, Xiao Ran-sama. Kanroji Mitsuri answered. She couldn't see the evil spirits, but her sharp spiritual sense felt the malicious intent radiating from the house like stairs pinned to the back of the neck. When Yotsuya Miko had opened the door, Mitsuri had felt a powerful wave of malice hit her. Everyone, get behind me, Mitsuri warned, and Sonoko and Ran darted to her side. Just as Miko moved forward, Xiao Ran reached out into the air behind her. Absorb. In his sight, his right hand closed on the dark mass. He activated the ability he had inherited from the 6 great demon lords and began drawing the malevolence out of the spirits. It was like a black hole opened in his palm. A rush of inky energy surged from the 6 evil spirits trailing Miko and converged toward him. In a few blinks, all the malevolence from those 6 was gone. Xiao Ran had expected the spirits themselves to vanish with the darkness, but what happened surprised him. As their malevolence cleared, the 6 hideous figures reverted to the shapes they'd had in life and began to glow with a gentle light. They turned into tiny motes and floated upward like little lights freed. A silent chorus of gratitude seemed to pass through them as they drifted away. I purified them? Xiao Ran thought, astonished. Why are there fireflies in broad daylight? Sonoko blurted, looking up. Where? Ran followed her gaze and saw the flickering specks before they vanished. Those aren't fireflies, Xiao Ran said, staring at the black residue still clinging to his palm. It felt revolting. He brought his hand to his nose and inhaled sharply. With a single slurp, the concentrated malevolence he'd drawn in was sucked into him through his nostrils, refined and absorbed. For someone wielding the power of the 6 great demon lords, this cluster of malevolence was trivial. He refined it in less than a tenth of a second. He felt the strength of his power inch upward by about 1/100,000th. So little, Xiao Ran muttered, somewhat disappointed. But his 6 great demon lords' power was already massive, and those 6 creatures, terrifying as they had looked, were comparatively weak. Their malevolence had never been strong. Still, any increase was welcome. There were far more spirits inside the house, dozens of them. If he cleared them all, he might boost his power by a 10,000th or more. Yotsuya Miko cupped her hands over her mouth, eyes bright with emotion as she watched the scene. Others might not have seen the spirits' transformations, but she had, watching them return to their original forms and lift into the sky like a monk purifying lost souls, was moving. Thank you, she cried. Xiao Ran knew Miko had been through a rough couple of days. She'd said she'd brought a Teru Teru Bozu back from a nearby shrine on Sunday, and the spirits had started appearing in force the day before yesterday. It sounded inconsistent at first, but in this world, people's sense of time was jumbled. Days and months could slip or be erased entirely. What seemed like a mismatch to an outsider could actually make sense here. Xiao Ran had learned not to try to straighten out anyone else's calendar. He'd come to accept the world's odd rhythm, live each day as it came. All right, let's clear the rest, Xiao Ran said, and strode into the house. There were about 10 evil spirits at the entrance. One by one he grabbed them, and in less than a second each, devoured their malevolence. He kept his distance from the spirit of Miko's father, who stood quietly by the side muttering to himself. The father's malevolence was nearly non-existent, and Miko hadn't asked him to be sent away. She wanted to keep him as a memory. Xiao Ran didn't press it. Besides, a spirit's longer it lingered in the human world, the greater the chance it would pick up malice. For now, the father was harmless. Inside, turning left led to the living room, which was crowded with even more evil spirits. Xiao Ran absorbed the mass in his hand, then sparked a ball of hellfire at his fingertip. With a flick, the flame stretched into a chain of fire that swept through the 20-odd spirits in the room, and with a slurp, their malevolence vanished into him. Nice. Efficient, he said, satisfied, and quelled the hellfire. He had no wish to immolate the pure spirits that had just been freed. The 20 or so entities gave their silent thanks and turned into specks of light. So they aren't fireflies, Sonoko realized belatedly. Where would fireflies come from in daylight? Xiao Ran smiled without answering and moved on to the kitchen. There were a dozen or so spirits there. He purified them the same way, drawing their darkness into himself and refining it. As he finished, Yotsuya Miko's voice floated from behind him. "There's a very terrifying one in the downstairs bathroom," she warned. Chapter 107, Section 107, Very Scary? Then I'd like to see how scary it is. Xiao Ran strode toward the first-floor bathroom. When he pushed the door open, a wave of malice hit Kenroji Mitsuri like a physical force, making every hair on her body stand on end. She drew her Nichiren blade instinctively, her face serious as she stared into the room. "Mitsuri Nichin, what's wrong?" Sonoko asked, curious. "There's a really terrifying presence in there," Mitsuri said, cold sweat beading on her forehead. Sonoko and Ran immediately gripped each other's hands. Ran went pale. She suddenly regretted coming along. At the bathroom entrance, Xiao Ran took in the scene. Unlike the living room and kitchen, the bathroom was almost entirely filled by a single demon. It was a tentacled thing, all black, a visible particulate black mist swirling around it. Its face was grotesquely distorted, and dozens of tentacles writhing and clinging to every surface. Just looking at it felt sanity-draining. "It's really scary," Xiao Ran murmured. The malice radiating from this demon dwarfed that of the others they'd seen, dozens of times stronger. That meant it was far more powerful. The demon fixed its eyes on Xiao Ran. When their gazes met, it let out a wild, frenzied roar. "Noisy." Xiao Ran frowned, and hellfire flared at his fingertips. The flame shot forward and midair shaped itself into a three-headed hellhound that lunged at the tentacled demon and tore at it savagely. Each bite stripped away a portion of the demon's malice, which Xiao Ran absorbed. The tentacled thing fought back. Its huge limbs lashed at the hellhound, but it was useless. Hellfire from beneath suppressed it. No matter how strong this demon was compared to the others, facing infernal flame left it with no choice but extermination. With a scream of pain, the demon's remaining malice was pulled away and absorbed. Xiao Ran retracted his hellfire. The tentacle demon shrank, resolving into the form of a small boy. He looked at Xiao Ran, whispered, "Thank you," then dissolved into specks of light and vanished. Another one sent to the afterlife. Xiao Ran nodded in satisfaction and refined the mass of malice he'd taken. Disappeared. Yotsuya Miko breathed, collapse threatening her. She felt drained until Ran steadied her, keeping her from falling. "Miko, are you all right?" Ran asked. "I'm fine," Miko said, shaking her head, her eyes shining as she looked at Xiao Ran. He turned and began up the stairs to the second floor. There were more demons upstairs than on the first, though individually they were weaker. Xiao Ran methodically cleared them all, then checked the attic. Astonishingly, such a small attic hid over a dozen demons. He sent them all on their way and inspected the yard until he was sure no more remained. Finally, he returned to the living room. "All the demons are gone. At least for now, you can live here in peace," Xiao Ran told Miko. "Thank you, Xiao Ran-jun," Miko said gratefully. If there hadn't been other people around, she would have hugged and kissed him. She was that relieved. Xiao Ran understood. Being able to see demons but having to live with them would make anyone crack. Miko's composure showed how strong she really was. "If this happens again, just call me straight away. You don't need to wait until you get to school," Xiao Ran added. He knew Miko didn't want to inconvenience him, but he could travel anywhere with his sling ring if necessary. If he wasn't wary about gods and demons, even crossing worlds would be a trivial matter for him. "I'll remember," Miko nodded. "All right then. Everyone hungry?" Xiao Ran clapped his hands and asked. Before anyone could answer, Mitsuri's stomach gave a loud rumble. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward her. I'm hungry," Mitsuri said, rubbing her stomach sheepishly. Xiao Ran laughed and waved his hand. "Dinner's on me tonight." They went to the nearest supermarket and bought an impressive haul: vegetables, beef, lamb, everything. Knowing Mitsuri's appetite, Xiao Ran overbought, enough for 30 people, so he could calmly eat a couple of portions. Ran, Sonoko, Miko, and her mother would take a few more, and Mitsuri could have the rest. "Oh, right, I'll call someone else over," Xiao Ran said, and phoned Kushikawa Shizuka. Soon 6 people filled Miko's living room. Everyone gathered around the kotatsu, eating hot pot and watching a comedy show on TV. The house felt warm and lively, completely different from the lonely, chilly atmosphere Miko usually lived in. "By the way, Miko, where's your brother?" Xiao Ran asked. "You mean Kyosuke?" Miko answered cheerfully. He lives in the dorms. He only comes home on weekends. Ah, so that was why Xiao Ran hadn't seen him. After dinner, Miko, having just met Sonoko and Ran, got along with them immediately. Around 8, everyone said their goodbyes and left Miko's house. Ran, see you tomorrow, Sonoko called, one arm threaded through Xiao Ran's. After watching Ran walk back into the Muri Detective Agency, Sonoko told the driver to go. In the car with her were Xiao Ran and Kanroji Mitsuri. Kushikawa Shizuka had already been dropped off earlier. Xiao Ran had asked her to stay, but she'd confided that her period had started, so it was inconvenient. The car was a luxury sedan Sonoko's family provided. Xiao Ran glanced at Sonoko. Are you sure you don't want to go home tonight? No one's home, Sonoko said with a giggle, so it's fine if I don't go back. She looked at him with the hungry, teasing expression of someone who'd enjoyed herself and wanted more. It had only been a day, and Sonoko was already craving it again. Xiao Ran smiled. If you're okay with that, I don't mind either. As for Yoko Okino, she was still at home resting. Who could keep up that kind of pace every day? Even the most tempting things need a break now and then. A day or two of rest was perfectly reasonable. Chapter 108, Section 108. But Xiao Ran's Superman-like physique, could he be an ordinary guy? He only acted so recklessly because he had a biological force field protecting him. Otherwise, he wouldn't dare to fool around like that. If he got carried away and used too much strength, it could turn into a crime scene in an instant. Kanroji Mitsuri, riding in the car, watched the two of them and rolled her eyes inwardly. Lord Xiao Ran was such a fickle scumbag. Her opinion of him just grew stranger by the minute. Back home, Sonoko had the chauffeur drive off, with instructions to pick her up after school the next day. She happily followed Xiao Ran into his house. Compared to an ordinary home, Xiao Ran's villa was not small. Of course, it couldn't compare to Sonoko's family estate. Hers was more like a sprawling compound. The garden alone was 2 or 3 times the size of Xiao Ran's entire place. Come in, Xiao Ran said, opening the door. Sonoko stepped inside, curious. It was her first time at his house. Xiao Ran, didn't you turn the lights off when you left? She asked. Xiao Ran looked at her. Kanroji Mitsuri, standing beside him, wore a practically gleeful look, ready for gossip. No, I have another guest at the house. Don't be too surprised when you see her, he said. Sonoko blinked. What kind of guest could surprise her so much? Then footsteps sounded from upstairs. Sonoko glanced up, and her eyes widened as Yoko Okino, in pajamas, appeared and came down the stairs. Miss Yoko Okino? Sonoko exclaimed. Hello, I'm Yoko Okino. Yoko smiled politely at Sonoko, a face the girl didn't recognize. You never told me Miss Yoko was staying with you, Sonoko said, astonished. She wasn't a die-hard fan, but she knew and admired Yoko Okino's work, so she was genuinely surprised Yoko would be living at Xiao Ran's place. Yoko Okino was shelved by her agency, wasn't she? Sonoko asked. So I poached her. Now she's on my payroll, Xiao Ran said. That's right, Xiao Ran is my new boss now, Yoko added with a smile. She looked at Sonoko and asked, and you are? Let me introduce you, Xiao Ran said, looping an arm around Sonoko. This is my girlfriend, Suzuki Sonoko. Girlfriend? Yoko's surprise flashed briefly. Kanroji Mitsuri, nearby, practically squealed inwardly. Here it was, the drama. Except, to her disappointment, Yoko didn't look upset at all. She smiled and began chatting normally with Sonoko. Sonoko, for her part, didn't seem bothered that another woman was staying in her boyfriend's house. Mitsuri had been bracing for fireworks and came away mildly deflated. Why the sigh? Xiao Ran asked, turning to Mitsuri. Nothing, she stammered, caught like a kid in class sneaking a snack. Xiao Ran narrowed his eyes. You were hoping for a love triangle, weren't you? Eh? Mitsuri looked shocked. He'd guessed it, and seeing that expression, she knew he had. How about it? Disappointed? Xiao Ran teased. Mitsuri was flummoxed, then quickly went into full cute repentance mode, reaching out and tugging one of Xiao Ran's fingers. Lord Xiao Ran, I won't do it again, Xiao Ran blinked. Since when could Mitsuri act spoiled like that? Who taught her? Xiao Ran, Sonoko called from where she was animatedly chatting with Yoko. Coming, Xiao Ran answered, releasing Mitsuri's hand and moving to join them. Mitsuri, seeing she'd been let off, covertly flashed a little victory sign. Don't worry, next time I'll dare. Late that night, after tutoring Sonoko through 3 ridiculously long math problems, Sonoko finally fell asleep from overthinking. Xiao Ran, still remarkably energetic, checked the bedside watch. It was nearly 1 in the morning. Forget it, time to sleep, he decided, stroking Sonoko's hair, lying down beside her, and closing his eyes. Within seconds, his breathing had deepened. He was asleep. Somewhere unknown, Xiao Ran opened his eyes and once again stood before the vast gate of American comics. Even though I've seen it before, it still feels majestic, he breathed. But in the next instant, a violent suction pulled him into the gate and he vanished. When he came to, he was lying on a stranger's bed. He sat up and took in the small room, barely 10 square meters, furnished simply with a bed, a desk, and a wardrobe. Almost immediately, information about his new identity flooded his mind. Xiao Ran, 17 years old, a sophomore at Midtown High School. Classmates included Peter Parker and the academic prodigy Gwen Stacy, who was always first or second in class. So this is the world of the Amazing Spider-Man, he thought. He checked the system's completion requirements. Clearance conditions: defeat at least 15 Spider-Men and eliminate the mastermind behind the Spider-Men's crossovers. Xiao Ran stared at the screen. Defeat at least 15 Spider-Men? Was Spider-Man on some kind of bulk discount? And kill the mastermind behind the Spider-Men's crossovers? They didn't even tell him who the mastermind was. He had to figure that out himself. Since the system requires defeating at least 15 Spider-Men, this world isn't just a simple Into the Spider-Verse setup, he muttered, pulling out the chair at the desk and sitting to gather his thoughts. First of all, he needed to figure out where the other Spider-Men were and who was behind these crossovers. Chapter 109, Section 109. From the achievement's clear conditions, Xiao Ran could already pick out several clues. For one thing, in the near future, or perhaps even right now, many Spider-Men would cross over from different universes. There would be at least 14 of them. Why 14 and not 15? Because there would also be a Spider-Man in this universe already. The second update had just come. Chapter 87. Who is the mastermind? Call me Superman. The terrified Kingpin. These crossovers weren't random. They were being orchestrated by a mastermind. Could it be Wilson Fisk himself, the Kingpin, like in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? That seemed unlikely. If the system wanted to be helpful, it could have named the culprit outright. Talking about a mastermind in riddling tones suggested it wasn't that obvious. Still, that didn't mean he shouldn't check Fisk Tower, just to rule it out. This world wouldn't necessarily follow the plotlines Xiao Ran knew from American comic movies. But the identity data he had received had shown Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy looking like the actors from The Amazing Spider-Man, only more beautified, almost two-dimensional. Maybe this world was a blend of live action and comic styles. Spider-Man universe, then, a place primarily telling Spider-Man stories, where some familiar beats might play out, but not necessarily exactly as he remembered. Beating a Spider-Man wouldn't be the hard part. The real problem was identifying who was pulling the strings. Xiao Ran cleared his thoughts and switched on his super hearing. Sounds from every corner of the globe flooded his mind. Traffic, footsteps, construction, conversations, an overwhelming soundscape. He listened for anything mentioning Spider-Man, space-time travel, or similar keywords, but after a few minutes he frowned and shut his hearing off. Nothing. No whispers of interdimensional crossings, no discussions of Spider-Men, at least not within the range his power could pick up. Maybe the plot hadn't started yet, he thought. Or maybe whoever was orchestrating this was deliberately silent, operating in a soundproofed place. He filtered his super hearing to flag the two terms, Spider-Man and space-time travel, so that any mention of either across the planet would immediately give him a fix. But he knew his limits. If the mastermind hid in a place with excellent soundproofing, his ears wouldn't help much. What now? Follow the old plan and check Kingpin? Xiao Ran glanced out at the sun. It was Sunday, no school today. He decided to wait until evening and kill time by sunbathing. He drifted up through the ceiling into the apartment above. In the living room, a drunken middle-aged man lay sprawled on the couch. Xiao Ran barely glanced at him and continued upward. 1 floor higher, occupants were exercising and so engrossed they didn't notice him. And Xiao Ran wasn't fully visible. He was in a state that made him invisible to the naked eye, though surveillance cameras could still pick him up. He hadn't bothered to tamper with the building's feeds. After a few more ceilings, he reached the rooftop and accelerated. With a sonic boom, a white trail cut into the sky as he shot away. He spent the day in space. For every 24 hours he sunbathed, he gained 20,000 tons of strength and roughly Mach 1 of speed. Compared to his base stats, tens of millions of tons and speeds in the thousands of Mach, this was small. But relative to the Spider-Man baseline, it was enormous. In the movies, a Spider-Man's strength is only around 50 tons when he's fully powered. 10 or 20 tons would already be impressive for a novice. An extra 20,000 tons overnight was nothing to scoff at. Xiao Ran wasn't the sort to leave free power on the table. Manhattan. Fisk Tower. It was past 9 that evening. Wilson Fisk stood behind his heavy desk, rubbing his temples. Lately, his business had been going badly. Masked vigilantes had disrupted transactions, pilfered goods worth hundreds of millions, and left many of his men in hospital beds. Anger curled in his chest. "Find him," Fisk hissed. He slammed a fist down on the solid wood desk. The wood creaked under the force. "If I find you, I'll skin you alive." A soft tapping sounded against the floor-to-ceiling window behind him, 3 faint knocks. Fisk turned. Outside, hovering a few feet off the glass, a figure in black cape and suit waved. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Kingpin?" Xiao Ran called cheerily. He'd returned from space with a bronzed look and practiced swagger. Fisk snapped to alert. He hit a button on his desk. Seconds later, the office door burst open, and a squad of armed goons poured in, sealing the room. They pressed themselves along the walls and tried to look impervious, but their eyes were wary. "Who are you?" Fisk demanded, staring at the floating stranger. "Good question. Call me Superman." Xiao Ran grinned and stole Clark Kent's name without shame. After all, there was no real Superman in this world. DC existed here only as fiction. What harm was a borrowed moniker between heroes? Fisk looked as if he hadn't quite heard through the thick glass. Xiao Ran didn't bother to repeat himself. He reached out and passed through the window pane as if it were smoke, then stepped into the office. He planted his hands on his hips and brought his chest forward in an exaggerated heroic pose. The black suit and cape made the silhouette look all the more dramatic, if anything, more like General Zod than the noble man of steel. "Superman?" Fisk's mouth tightened. He felt mocked. Still, the trick of passing through intact glass gave him pause. This was no ordinary street thug. Whoever this was had dangerous powers. Fisk's hand crept toward his chair's concealed alarm, while his lieutenants trained guns on the intruder. Dealing with someone like this required more than brute force. Fortunately, Fisk himself was no ordinary opponent. Don't let his rotund silhouette fool you. Kingpin was all muscle. He could lift nearly 15 tons and punch through reinforced concrete without breaking a sweat. He wasn't just big, he was dangerous, a wallbuster whose reach extended through an army of subordinates and elite killers like Bullseye. Ordinary superheroes wouldn't necessarily walk away from him unscathed. "What if I told you this comic was made with me as the prototype? Do you believe that?" Xiao Ran said without a hint of embarrassment, meeting Kingpin's stare with a calm expression. For a moment, Kingpin almost believed him. Then he remembered the timeline. The Superman comics dated back to the Great Depression. It was already 2020 now. The boy in front of him looked barely a dozen years old. There was no way he'd lived through the Depression. That ruled him out. Kingpin's anger flared. "State your purpose, or don't blame me for being impolite," he growled. "I'm here to ask you a few questions," Xiao Ran answered coolly. Xiao Ran didn't care whether Kingpin took him for Superman or a liar. He stepped forward and asked bluntly, "Are your son and wife still alive?" Kingpin blinked. "I'm not married." "Not married." Xiao Ran's face fell into a disappointed shake of the head. So this Kingpin had never met Vanessa. Maybe Vanessa didn't exist in this world at all. In that case, he wasn't the man Xiao Ran had been searching for. "Is that all you wanted to know?" Kingpin demanded, barely keeping his voice even. "Almost." Xiao Ran's expression hardened. "Just in case you're lying, I want to see the images in your mind." "Stop," Kingpin barked, and his men moved like a single, practiced unit. Dozens of weapons were trained on the boy in an instant. "Listen to me," Xiao Ran said, unimpressed. "Don't point those broken toys at me unless you want to be embarrassed." A figure in a black bodysuit with a white circle on his mask scoffed. I'd like to see what you've got. It was Bullseye, one of Kingpin's deadliest agents. He spat a toothpick from between his lips, flicking it toward Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran frowned. The gesture was crude and filthy. He didn't want a used toothpick touching him. He flicked his finger, sending the toothpick back through the air. It cut a sharp line, and though Bullseye turned his head to dodge, it nicked his cheek. Blood welled instantly. "Shoot him," Bullseye snarled. At the command, the surrounding goons opened fire. Bullet casings clinked and fell as magazines emptied. Bullets pounded Xiao Ran, his body, his face, even his eyes, but nothing penetrated. Projectiles flattened like tin and dropped harmlessly to the floor. Dozens of men put hundreds, maybe thousands of rounds into him in a minute. If Xiao Ran had been metal, he would have been chewed to pieces. Instead, he brushed an imaginary speck of dust off, grinned, and looked at the shell-shocked crowd. "Are you done shooting?" he asked. "Now it's my turn." In the next instant, a blade of searing heat vision ripped from Xiao Ran's eyes. Screams cut the air as dozens of men were sliced in half, their bodies falling like ragged curtains. Kingpin dropped to the ground instinctively, avoiding being bisected. When he scrambled up, trembling, he saw Bullseye's throat held in a white-knuckled grip. Xiao Ran held him by the neck as casually as one would hold a coat hanger. Seeing Kingpin rise, Xiao Ran stepped through the disarray, crushing Bullseye's neck with a contemptuous twist and tossing the body aside. He walked over the scorched and split corpses and stopped a hair's breadth from Kingpin. "You were agile," Xiao Ran said, smiling faintly. "I'll call you the most flexible fat man." Kingpin had no laugh in him. Whatever this was, miracle or trick, the attack had been straight out of the comic book's playbook. Heat vision. He had been exposed and overmatched. "Squat down," Xiao Ran ordered. Kingpin hesitated. His pride and authority warred with survival, but he was not a fool. He had seen what the boy could do. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered himself a little. At 2 meters tall, Kingpin still towered over Xiao Ran, but the small compromise made the difference. Xiao Ran reached out without warning. His hand passed through Kingpin's face as if it were water, sinking into the skull to touch the brain. Kingpin's eyes widened in raw terror. He felt nothing from the touching hand, just an unbearable pressure as memories were tugged loose and forced to the surface. It was the most horrible feeling he'd ever known, but the alternative was worse. He had seen the fate of his men lying dead on the floor. He wasn't about to end up like them in tomorrow's headlines. Xiao Ran sifted through images, memories, names, events, fingers skimming through Kingpin's past. What he found confirmed his suspicions. This Kingpin had come a long way in New York's underworld, but he hadn't yet become the ruthless underground emperor who would one day crush his family. He hadn't married Vanessa. She didn't exist in his life in this timeline. Rival powers still challenged him, the Hand and their five-fingered influence, and gangs from the Polar Bear district that held significant sway. Kingpin's grip on the city was strong, but unfinished. He was an important thug, not yet the undisputed master. Xiao Ran withdrew his hand and stepped back. The data gathered. He had taken what he needed. Kingpin, pale and breathing hard, had survived, this time. Chapter 111, Section 111, Kingpin already knew Vanessa, and he did have some fondness for her, but not the kind that led to marriage or children. "Looks like it's not you," Xiao Ran said, withdrawing his hand from Kingpin's head. He patted the fat, bald face and smiled. "I didn't expect you, big guy, to be so honest, but I killed a lot of your men. You're not going to hold that against me, are you?" "No, them dying is their own fault," Kingpin replied coolly. He didn't care about the lives of his subordinates. Even before he became the ruthless man who would later choke his wife and child, he'd always been selfish. For Bullseye, he felt a twinge of regret. Bullseye had been useful, but that was as far as it went. "Is that so? I'm glad you understand," Xiao Ran said with a chuckle, then added, "By the way, I'm a bit short on cash. Think you could help me out? I hear you, Fisk, are a well-known philanthropist." Kingpin heard the sarcasm, but ignored it. If his life could be saved, everything else could be negotiated. "How much do you want?" he asked. "Just 100 million, Xiao Ran said, as if it were small change. Even for Kingpin, $100 million wasn't pocket change. It would take time to raise. But compared to his life, Xiao Ran's demand was nothing. "Fine, give me an account number and I'll transfer it," Kingpin agreed. Xiao Ran smiled and ruffled the bald head. Good boy, he mocked, then gestured for Kingpin to hurry and give him the account details. Kingpin didn't mind the insult. He stepped over the bodies scattered on the office floor, went to his desk, and initiated a transfer of $100 million to an anonymous offshore account. When it was done, he handed the account info to Xiao Ran. See you next time, Xiao Ran said, waved, and left. Once the interloper was gone, Kingpin's smile vanished. He looked over the corpses, picked up the phone, and ordered men to come clean up the mess. He would keep today's events to himself until he had absolute confidence, and when he was ready to deal with Xiao Ran, he would make sure the other man understood the full cost of crossing him. Xiao Ran spent another night out in space, sunbathing, and when the time was right, he returned to Earth. It was Monday, school day. In his original Zongmen world, Xiao Ran was a high school student. Here, in this American comic world, he was still a high schooler. He touched his smooth face in the mirror and sighed. Being too young isn't always a good thing. He shrugged, picked up his helmet, went downstairs, and rode the motorcycle he'd bought last night, paid for with Fisk's money, toward Midtown High School. He'd bought the bike late, somewhere else, and brought it back. He didn't need to explain the logistics. Riding at full speed, he pulled into the outdoor lot at Midtown High, parked, took off his helmet, and was about to leave when classmates called his name. A few guys from his class had seen the cool ride and came over, curious. They were on decent terms with Xiao Ran in his identity setting. Not best friends, but not enemies, so he chatted easily. One of them, on the football team, immediately declared he'd buy one after school. Let's ride together, the guy said with a grin. Xiao Ran nodded and agreed. Whether he actually went along later was another matter. He walked into the academic building, stowed his helmet in his locker, and started down the hall when an argument broke out behind him. Can you two go make out somewhere else? What's it to you? You're blocking my locker. So what? You gonna hit me? There was a bang. Xiao Ran turned and watched Peter Parker punch a much larger black student, at least half a head taller, easily over 6 feet, to the floor with a single blow. Peter spread his hands to the stunned onlookers and said he'd never heard a request like that. Xiao Ran blinked. This wasn't the Peter he knew. No skinny teen should be able to knock down someone that size with one punch. Curious, Xiao Ran used his X-ray vision. Peter's muscle density was off the charts, 10 to 20 times that of a normal person. Had he already been bitten by the genetically modified spider? The personality was unexpected too, harsher, more willing to meet violence with violence. He even had the face of Andrew Garfield's Peter. This world was definitely different. After stashing his skateboard in his locker, Peter came over and greeted Xiao Ran. Xiao, morning. Xiao Ran nodded and returned the greeting. What was that about? He asked, pointing to the student who was being helped up by his girlfriend. He asked for it, Peter said matter-of-factly, told him to run his mouth. Xiao Ran just watched and then walked into class with Peter. Gwen Stacy was already in her seat. Seeing Peter approach, she answered him with a cold, distant manner. Their interaction wasn't the warm, mutual banter he expected. Gwen seemed indifferent. Curiosity got the better of him, and Xiao Ran used his X-ray vision again. He swore he wasn't looking for anything weird. He was just curious. The result surprised him. Gwen's muscle density was even higher than Peter's, roughly 2 to 3 times his. If Peter had been bitten recently, Gwen had clearly been affected long ago, at least a year, maybe more. Her strength was on a completely different level, roughly 50 tons. Peter, by contrast, was maybe a dozen tons at most. The dynamics in this world were shifting, and Xiao Ran had just gotten another unexpected glimpse of how different things could be here. Chapter 112, Section 112, Two Spider-Men. How interesting. And both of them are from this universe. Could there be multiple Spider-Men here? Xiao Ran couldn't help speculating after watching Gwen. Earlier, when he had scanned the whole planet with his super hearing, he hadn't picked up any name like Ghost Spider. In other words, neither of the two spider-type people in this universe had become a public vigilante yet. But that didn't completely fit. He remembered what he'd seen in Kingpin's memories the night before. A masked street vigilante had been disrupting several of Kingpin's deals, someone who shot webs from his body. That sounded a lot like Spider-Man. So which one of you is it? He wondered, staring between Gwen and Peter. His gaze must have been obvious. Both Peter and Gwen looked back. Xiao, what are you staring at? Gwen snapped, her tone sharp. That tone was different from the Gwen he remembered, more irritable, almost hostile. Nothing, Xiao Ran said casually. You two seem weird today. Peter felt a jolt. For a moment he feared Xiao Ran had seen through his secret. Then he figured Xiao Ran might have been referring to the fight he'd started in the hallway earlier. He used to be shy at school and never stood up to bullies. He had always been the one getting picked on. Peter thought about whether he should keep pretending to be the same meek kid. But he had powers now. Could he really go back to being afraid? No. He decided that if anyone asked, he'd claim he'd picked up some fighting skills somewhere. The thought of actually roughing up his former tormentors excited him. Maybe he'd slip sacks over their heads after school and break a few legs, just enough to teach them a lesson. Not kill them, just make sure they couldn't trouble him again. The idea felt oddly satisfying. Gwen glowered at Xiao Ran for a long beat and then, under his smile, turned away without a word. After class, Xiao Ran followed them. He left on his motorcycle and parked by a tall building, climbed to the rooftop, and used his X-ray vision to track Gwen and Peter. He settled on the edge of the roof with a drink and watched. What he saw next surprised him. Peter, masked, ambushed Thompson and several members of the school football team. The same kid who'd boasted about buying a motorcycle that morning was among them. Peter slipped sacks over heads, punched and kicked them, and then stomped on each of their legs until they couldn't stand. Xiao Ran whistled under his breath. This wasn't the shy, awkward Peter Parker he expected. He was ruthless, efficient, and violent. The world felt strangely off. He refocused on Gwen, thinking maybe she was the masked vigilante. She left without showing any sign of crime fighting, heading toward Hell's Kitchen. Could Gwen be the real spider of this universe? Xiao Ran tracked her into a rundown apartment building. She climbed to the 7th floor and unlocked a door. Voices, arguing, spilled out the moment the door opened. Gwen walked into familiar chaos. Her father and mother were at it again. The father asked for money the moment she came in. Gwen, got any change? He demanded. No, get lost. Gwen snapped, harsher than she had been at school. When he didn't move fast enough, she shoved him to the floor. He cursed and called her a waste of money. She spun on him, eyes hard. Say that again and I'll cut out your tongue, she hissed. Her father straightened immediately and retreated with a mutter. Gwen slammed the door and headed to her room, completely indifferent to a drunken woman dozing on the couch. Xiao Ran ran his hand through his hair. Peter was acting like a bully, and Gwen's home life was a mess, completely different from the versions he remembered. No wonder their personalities were inverted from his expectations. Anyone raised in a place like that could turn out hardened and bitter. On the rooftop, he sorted through the facts. Both Peter and Gwen had been bitten by the genetic spider, so they should both be spider type, but their behavior didn't match what he knew. If neither of them fit the masked vigilante pattern, then maybe there was a third Spider-Man in this universe, one he hadn't seen yet. If so, that third Spider-Man would be local to this universe. No spider people from other universes had shown up here that he could detect. He decided to wait until nightfall. Before that, he grabbed dinner. Cheap American fare, burgers, hot dogs, pizza, felt uninspiring, so he tried a nearby place for Mexican-style barbecue. The meat was good, but not exactly to his taste. He thought it might have been better with a Chinese touch. When night came, he went back to Hell's Kitchen, climbed a taller building, and sat on the rooftop edge to see if a third Spider-Man would appear. About 2 hours had passed. It was already around 10 o'clock. Hell's Kitchen was still alive and buzzing, in some places more so than during the day. A shootout at one intersection had two gangs trading bullets across the street. The chaos was almost thrilling to watch. Xiao Ran watched with amused interest, wondering which side would win. He personally favored the group on the left, if only because they looked marginally more pleasing to the eye. Then a masked vigilante swung in on webs, and the fight abruptly collapsed. "Oh, he actually showed up," Xiao Ran murmured, focusing on the newcomer. Masks might do the trick for other people, but to Xiao Ran they were purely unnecessary, like taking off your pants just to fart. "Let me see who you are," he muttered. The next moment his expression went utterly strange. How could it be him? Xiao Ran never expected the third Spider-Man to be this person. He had run through possibilities. Maybe Peter Parker's biological father hadn't died in this universe. Maybe Uncle Ben had somehow gained spider powers. But he never imagined Harry Osborn would be Spider-Man. Wasn't Harry supposed to be on the Green Goblin track? Had the script been rewritten? Watching Harry Osborn shooting webs from his wrists and swinging between buildings, quickly subduing dozens of gang members from both sides, Xiao Ran felt his head buzz. This world kept getting stranger. Good people became bad people sometimes turned heroic. Was Harry Osborn the Spider-Man of this universe? All right, Xiao Ran said to himself. Ridiculous as it sounds, it's a fact. So it was confirmed. There were 3 spider people in this universe. Strictly speaking, one was Spider-Man, and the others were spider people, but the point was the same. Even if Peter Parker in this world hid faces in sacks and broke legs, and Gwen Stacy had become cold and indifferent, they were still the spider people. Xiao Ran needed for his system achievements. If that was the case, he might as well start with Harry. After Harry finished binding the gang members with webs and was about to swing off, Xiao Ran leapt down from a rooftop and intercepted him. "Hey, hello, Spider-Man," he called. Harry, in the mask, hadn't expected someone to descend and address him by that name. He blinked. When had he been given that nickname? Looking at the webs he'd been firing, though, the name did start to fit. He smiled beneath the mask. Hello," he answered, trying to sound friendly. "May I ask if you need something?" "Nothing but a fight," Xiao Ran said. "Huh?" Harry hesitated, but then Xiao Ran didn't waste any more words. With a flick of his fingers, he sent a bullet-riddled car parked at the curb flying straight at Harry. "Shit!" Harry shouted and dodged, taking the threat seriously. "You'd better use your full strength. Someone might die otherwise." The warning had dropped into an eerie silence. Harry's expression hardened. "All right, this is my first time fighting another metahuman. I hope you're as strong as you say." He shot forward, springing on the elasticity of his webs. Xiao Ran met him head-on. He caught Harry's punch in one hand. About 60 tons of force. Not bad, Xiao Ran observed. Under Harry's stunned eyes, Xiao Ran grabbed his arm and swung him into the pavement. Again and again, Harry slammed into the ground, stars exploding behind his eyes, until Xiao Ran finally flung him into a wall. The wall collapsed, burying Harry beneath a pile of bricks. He's around 60 tons, probably the strongest of the 3 spider people in this universe, Xiao Ran thought as he checked to make sure Harry was only mildly injured and not in mortal danger. Satisfied, he strolled away. After some time, Harry limped out from the hole in the ruined wall, looking around for the boy who had assaulted him, but he was gone. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of Harry's mouth beneath the mask. He felt unlucky. He'd been out doing what he thought was the right thing, and instead ran into some superpowered maniac who beat him senseless and then walked off. "Next time I see you, I'll make you pay," Harry vowed silently, then shot a web and swung away. Xiao Ran headed for Queens. Peter Parker still lived there. That much hadn't changed, and Xiao Ran had come to find him. When he arrived, Peter was in the yard chatting with a neighbor girl. She was plain and looked older than Peter, more like someone in her late 20s or even 30s by Eastern standards. Westerners often mature earlier in appearance, so a 17 or 18-year-old could read older to Xiao Ran's eye. Peter, however, clearly liked her and kept sneakily staring at her curves. Xiao Ran decided not to comment on that particular taste. Was this Mary Jane? So Peter in this universe still liked her. Just then a red Mustang pulled up and honked at the house. "Hey, get in!" called the man inside. "Coming," the girl called back. She tossed her hair at Peter and said with a little smile, "Peter, my boyfriend's here to pick me up. If you want to ask me out, at least get yourself a car." With that, she turned away from the embarrassed Peter and walked toward her wealthy boyfriend. In the car, the engine idled as they prepared to leave. A heavy-set man in his 30s hugged and kissed Mary Jane as she climbed into a car, and Peter, standing in the yard, felt his face go hot with irritation. The man even shot Peter a mocking smile before driving off. What's he showing off for? It's just a beat-up car, Peter grumbled. I'll buy one tomorrow, then I can take MJ out on dates too. He let his imagination run, picturing himself driving off with Mary Jane. Then a sudden cough made him spin around. A man he didn't recognize stood a few feet behind him. Peter Parker. Hello, the man said. Peter blinked. The stranger looked ordinary, but there was something off, an impression shaped by a subtle illusion. The man was Xiao Ran, and he'd warped Peter's perception so Peter wouldn't realize who he really was. For now, Xiao Ran kept his abilities hidden. The other Spider-Men from other universes hadn't arrived yet, and the mastermind he searched for still cast no shadow. Who are you? What are you doing at my house? Peter fired 2 questions at him, suspicious and ready to assume the worst. You don't need to know who I am, Xiao Ran replied with a grin. I'm here to fight you. A fight? With me? Peter pointed at himself in astonishment. Why? Because you're strong, Xiao Ran said. Peter's chest puffed up at the compliment. If this guy thought he was strong, Peter was happy to oblige. All right, he said. How do you want to fight? Whatever you like. You go first. Xiao Ran's casual invitation rubbed Peter the wrong way. Time to show him what he could do. Peter threw a punch, holding back. He estimated he used maybe 1/30th of his real strength. Bang! The man flew out and slammed onto the road outside the yard. Xiao Ran got up, brushed himself off, and called to Peter from the road. Don't disappoint me. Be serious. Peter staggered to his feet, rubbing his stomach, both impressed and confused. You've got powers too? Were you bitten by a spider as well? No, I was bitten by God. The words were arrogant and oddly casual. Xiao Ran had been 3 or 4 meters away when he said it. By the time the last syllable left his mouth, he'd already closed the distance. He slapped Peter's face, tripped both his legs, and landed a full-force punch on the airborne Parker. Bang! Peter went flying again, harder this time. His ribs slammed into his spine. Gasping on the ground, Peter's expression turned fierce. I take back what I said earlier. I'm going to break all 3 of your legs, he snarled, lunging forward. Predictably, Xiao Ran beat him down again. Peter's control of his powers was still rough. His strength hadn't reached full potential, and his spider sense flickered because his mind and body weren't yet in sync. Still, with each exchange, Peter's movements sharpened, his power climbing by small increments, maybe adding 1 or 2 tons of force. But it wasn't enough. Lying like a rag doll on the pavement, gasping for breath, Peter watched Xiao Ran rise. Keep it up, Xiao Ran said, and then he turned and left. Peter stayed on the ground a long time. When the worst of the dizziness passed, he hauled himself upright, teeth bared. Damn it! Who was that lunatic? I don't even know you, he muttered as he walked back toward the house, vowing in his head that he would avenge this humiliation, one day, 1,000 times over, if he had to. Hell's Kitchen. Xiao Ran's next stop was Hell's Kitchen. He found Gwen, another spider-powered vigilante, right in the midst of her own brand of justice. She was in a narrow alley, raining blows on a group of thugs until they lay still. Gwen showed no mercy. When it was over, she squatted among the bodies and searched their pockets, coming up with a handful of crumpled bills. $76? You pathetic bastards, she spat, kicking the corpses and stalking off with an irritated huff. There were a lot of alleys like this in Hell's Kitchen, places where daylight didn't mean safety. Tonight, the thugs had been unlucky. They'd crossed Gwen, who had a cold efficiency for hunting down criminals, beating them until they were dead, and then taking whatever cash they carried. That routine was practiced, ruthless, and efficient. From the way she moved, Xiao Ran could tell she'd done this many times. By midnight, Gwen's tally for the night was grimly impressive. She'd killed 133 thugs and 17 others, and her haul totaled nearly $3,000. She grinned at the money like a kid with a new prize. Not bad. New clothes money, she said, pleased. Gwen had discovered this method of earning cash the hard way. The first time a few thugs tried to follow and rob her, she'd turned the tables and walked away with their money. It wasn't a path to riches, but it paid for tuition, food, and clothes, everything her unreliable parents wouldn't provide. Gwen had supported herself for years. Rely on others? Unthinkable. She planned to lay low for a few days. The last time she'd spent several nights in a row taking money, the gangs had been desperate to find her. She could dodge handguns, but what if several gang members opened up with AKs? or brought RPGs. Even she knew there were limits to how many bullets and explosives she could avoid. P.S. First update delivered. Monthly votes finally passed 100 today, so I'm adding an extra chapter. Thanks to reader X by Way X for the 1000 reward tip. I'll add another extra chapter tomorrow. How will future bonus updates be decided? Maybe if monthly votes reach 120 or if flowers hit 100,000, either one works. Chapter 90. Beating Gwen? Is it serious? Wild Gwen. Chapter 115. Section 115. After a while, Gwen learned her lesson. She stopped striking in the same place twice. She hit and ran every time, and the local gangs hated it. Their numbers kept shrinking, and some weaker crews were even absorbed by stronger ones. Gwen didn't think it was her fault. She was just a poor student trying to get through school. What did she care about thousands of lives? Weren't most of them just mobsters anyway? This Gwen has a terrifying killing intent, Xiao Ran muttered as he watched her work. She'd racked up an impressive tally in a single night. Punisher, not Spider-Man, he thought with a chuckle. When Gwen finished and started heading home, Xiao Ran followed at a distance. She stashed her money, turned away, and walked in the direction of her building. He made a deliberate little noise to let her notice him. "Still more?" he called, stepping forward. Gwen sneered when she realized someone had been tailing her. "Fine. I'll do a little overtime before I clock out." She sauntered back into a nearby crime alley. Since she'd already cleared most of the gangs in the area, no one followed. In the middle of the alley, she stopped and bent down to tie her shoelace. Xiao Ran grinned. She used that trick often enough to give pursuers a chance to catch up. He decided to play along. "Hello, need some help?" he called, slowing to match her pace and peeking at her bent form. "Don't come any closer," Gwen cried, clutching her chest and stepping back with an exaggerated, frightened look. She loved the drama. Xiao Ran laughed. "Don't be afraid, girl. I'm not a good person." Gwen, inwardly, "I know you're not a good person." Outwardly, she glanced up and, for a second, looked surprised. The man in front of her was a handsome Asian about her own age. Were Asians getting into $0 shopping this young now? "What do you want?" "Nothing," he said. "I have a few sets of 3 years of college entrance exams, 5 years of mock tests. I thought might help. You're still a student, right?" He produced several test papers from behind him and handed them to her. Gwen blinked. Test papers. They looked real for a second, but Xiao Ran started laughing. The papers were an illusion. They vanished. Gwen's face went dark. "Who are you? What do you want?" she demanded, teeth clenched. "Nothing. Just a mob passing through. I found you interesting, so I followed to watch the show," Xiao Ran said, amused. "Then you saw everything?" Gwen's eyes flashed with a cold killing intent. She didn't mind killing to silence someone. "Yes, I saw it all," he said, smiling. Gwen inhaled and raised her head. No fear this time, only a chilling blankness. "Then I can't let you live." She sprang forward like a striking animal. Her foot came down in a brutal chop that shattered the air. Xiao Ran rolled aside, caught her next whip kick, grabbed her calf, and threw a punch. Their fists met with a crack. Gwen staggered back, shook her hand, and winced at the reddening across her knuckles. This guy was tougher than she'd expected. Xiao Ran hooked a finger at her, still amused. Gwen ground her teeth and rushed in again. A straight kick, a reverse whip kick. When he blocked, she pushed off with both hands, launched herself several meters into the air, slammed off the wall for extra leverage, and aimed a heavy downward chop. Xiao Ran thought as he watched. Her technique was solid. She'd been systematically trained and had seen real fighting. In raw skill and battle experience, she outclassed a lot of opponents. Her strength had limits, but her agility was exceptional. Her speed was faster, and her use of spider sense was more refined, probably honed by countless fights. After trading blows for a while, Xiao Ran grew bored of toying with her. In an instant, he moved with dozens of times the speed he'd shown before and materialized in front of her. He slammed Gwen into the wall so hard it cracked. Gripping her by the throat, he looked down at her hurting face and asked, "Do you surrender?" Gwen nodded frantically. Only then did he let go. She hit the ground, coughing, then glared up at him. "You were playing with me just now? What, you like getting beaten in one move?" Xiao Ran chuckled. Gwen was speechless. Of course, she didn't like losing quickly, and she hated being toyed with, but she was outmatched. It annoyed her. "Want to get a drink?" she asked suddenly. Xiao Ran blinked. After punching and humiliating him, she wanted to buy him a drink? Was this a trap? "If you're going to poison it, forget it," he warned with a smirk. "Don't be a coward," Gwen taunted. "All right, let's go," Xiao Ran said, curious to see her next trick. Even if she spiked the whole bottle with cyanide, he figured he'd be fine. He motioned. "Then follow me." Chapter 116, Section 116. Gwen said nothing more. She turned and walked to the other side of the alley. Xiao Ran smiled, hands in his pockets, and followed. They moved in silence until she led him down to the bank of a dried-up riverbed. Gwen knelt, reached into an abandoned pipe, and pulled out a small box. Inside were bottles of different liquors and a pack of cigarettes. "This is my collection," she said. Her voice carried a roughness that made sense when she explained. Her mother had drunk heavily when Gwen was very young, and her father had been a gambler. She'd learned to smoke and drink early. She picked up a bottle. "Bourbon?" she asked. "Sure," Xiao Ran said, and she handed him a glass after she poured. She drank straight from the bottle herself. "Cheers," she said heartily. Xiao Ran, looking at such a pretty girl who drank like she had, chuckled and lifted the glass. He sipped. It tasted like normal liquor. "Not poisoned, then," he said. Gwen smiled. "Of course not." They sat down on the dry riverbed and talked for a while. At some point, Xiao Ran took off his illusion, his mental disguise, and Gwen's surprised face turned toward him. "Xiao? Is that you?" she blurted, rubbing her eyes. "What I saw before wasn't what you actually look like." "Just a simple illusion," Xiao Ran said. Gwen scowled. "Simple? That wasn't simple." He laughed at her angry expression, then thought through what had just happened. Of course, Gwen had invited him here to make sure he wouldn't reveal whatever secret she was hiding. She'd probably planned to shut him up. When force was out of the question, she'd chosen a softer approach. Once he realized that, Xiao Ran, who wasn't one to blab anyway, decided to placate her. He offered to exchange secrets. If both of them held something on the other, neither would be at risk. Gwen relaxed. She couldn't say life was perfect, far from it, but she was going to college soon and hoped she could escape her family. She didn't want anyone to know what she'd done or that she had special abilities. The idea of someone finding out had worried her, and Xiao Ran's understanding made her breathe easier. "I didn't think you were such a nice person," she said, looking at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. "I've always been a good person," Xiao Ran replied shamelessly. "Is this the first day you noticed?" "Sk, who calls themselves a good person?" Gwen scoffed, smiling despite herself. They sat there drinking and talking, and after a while, Gwen leaned her head on his shoulder. Xiao Ran turned to look at her. Their eyes met. Before he could react, Gwen hugged him and kissed him, sudden and fierce. He froze. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "Want to go to your place?" he asked. "My place isn't great," she said, shaking her head. "Here's fine. I like it here." All right, that was bold. Xiao Ran used his material manipulation ability to subtly alter the terrain around them, muffling sound and changing small contours so their spot was hidden. He listened, no wanderers nearby, no drones overhead, then relaxed. The moon was bright, the stars sparse. It was a beautiful night. At 2 or 3 in the morning, most of the city was asleep. Xiao Ran, who had just been helping Gwen with a few basic math problems, stood shirtless now, drinking and gazing at the sky. Gwen came up behind him, wrapped her arms around him, and whispered into his ear. "The stars. Do you think there are Kryptonians in this world?" "Probably," Xiao Ran said after a pause. Gwen thought about it a moment. The universe was so vast, planets innumerable. If there weren't other Kryptonian-like life forms out there, that would almost be more terrifying. What a lonely, improbable universe that would be. Maybe the humans' picture of the cosmos was limited, maybe even false. The idea made her giggle. "Could it be your male sage mode?" she teased, then ran off laughing. Xiao Ran smiled to himself. What he was really thinking about wasn't necessarily Kryptonians, but life from other universes. He regretted he couldn't bring the sling ring across, an artifact he'd brought once from the Deadpool and Wolverine world, and one of the most useful things he'd ever obtained. The Krypton battle armor he'd gotten from the Man of Steel world had only been used once, and mostly gathered dust at home. From the Black Adam world, he'd brought a sliver of the Eternity Stone, an item representative of that reality, after a lot of consideration. Gwen returned and leaned into him again, and for a while they sat in companionable silence, watching distant stars and letting the night weave its small, fragile peace around them. He couldn't use it anyway. Even as a souvenir, it would do. What could he take back from this world? Xiao Ran thought about it suddenly. If he could, he actually wanted to take Gwen with him. She'd been wild back then, but in reality, she was still a young woman. How old was she? With her personality and the superpowers she'd gained more than a year ago, she looked down on ordinary people. What a pity the system wouldn't let him take living people away. He wondered, though, could he re-enter an American comic world he'd already visited? He asked the system, not expecting much. The thing had never been particularly bright. But what if? System, can I return to an American comic world I've already visited? I don't mean a later timeline of a world I've experienced, but this specific world in the current timeline. He half expected silence. Instead, the system answered, and the response surprised him. Theoretically, no, but there is one exception. Xiao Ran's eyes lit up. Oh, what's the exception? If the currently experienced American comic world has completely ended and the host has experienced all the plot worlds, then you can re-enter. Completely ended? Like when the movies and comics are over? Yes. So is my current world considered ended? Like the previous DC movie universe that got rebooted? Would that count? The current world is an independent world with no additional plot branches. Once the host clears it, repeat entry becomes possible. Rebooted worlds are also considered ended. The system's certainty made Xiao Ran smile. So this is an independent world. No wonder the plot's been changed beyond recognition. He grinned to himself. If that's the case, as long as I clear it, I can come back whenever I want. Whether I take her to the Zongman world or not doesn't really matter. Actually, maybe that was for the best. Gwen didn't seem the type to accept Xiao Ran's usual womanizing the way Sonoko might. If he took Gwen to the Zongman world, they might end up fighting. It's getting late. I should head home. Dawn was beginning to pale the sky. Gwen dusted off her pants and stood up. Okay, I should get back too. Xiao Ran nodded. Do I need to play it cool and pretend we aren't close at Midtown High? No need, Gwen said. Xiao Ran reached out, gently stroked her cheek, and kissed her smooth, fair face. I'll walk you home. Gwen smiled and walked ahead. The evening had started oddly, but ended well. It wasn't that she particularly liked Xiao Ran. She had always admired strength, ever since she was a child, and wanted a partner stronger than herself. With her current power, who in this world could be stronger than her except Xiao Ran? Maybe they really were a match. Besides, other women probably couldn't handle someone like him. She hummed happily. She'd made $3,000 last night and found someone who felt like a kindred spirit. Were they boyfriend and girlfriend? Gwen decided it counted. She wasn't planning to leave Xiao Ran. And if he felt the same, why not? Love, romance, marriage. She didn't believe in those things, not after watching her parents fight. Practical matters mattered more. Xiao Ran dropped Gwen at her door and left. She didn't invite him up, and he didn't plan to go inside. He found his motorcycle where he'd parked it and rode back to his apartment in Queens. Maybe I should move somewhere else, he thought on the way. Money wasn't the problem. Of the $100 million Kingpin had given him, he still had over $99 million left. Buying a house is a hassle. Maybe I'll let Kingpin handle it. He decided he would. Whether Kingpin liked it or not didn't concern him. He'd seen Kingpin's business card on the desk when he'd left last time. He could remember the number with a little effort. Once home, he called Kingpin directly, not caring if he interrupted the man's morning and told him to get a villa. It doesn't need to be huge, Xiao Ran told him. Something ordinary will do. I live alone. Too big is a pain. After all, once he cleared this world, he could come back whenever he wanted. If he intended to stay a long time, a more comfortable place made sense. Kingpin, though visibly annoyed, dared not protest. The man on the other end was Superman. Unless he wanted to die, he wouldn't turn against Xiao Ran. Besides, Kingpin didn't truly know Xiao Ran's strength. His plans that seemed foolproof to him might look comical to Xiao Ran. When he finished with the villa, Xiao Ran checked the time. It was past 6:30 a.m. He went downstairs, got on his bike, and rode to Chinatown for breakfast. By the time he finished and headed to Midtown High, his timing was perfect. In the hallway, he ran into Peter again. Peter still had some bruises on his face, the marks from the fight the night before. Peter didn't know Xiao Ran had been the one to hit him. "Hey, Peter," Xiao Ran called with a smile. "Hey, Xiao?" Peter replied with a nod, looking a little preoccupied. Then a big, burly kid walked by. Seeing Peter, he put on a mean grin and deliberately bumped Peter's shoulder hard. Bang! The blow should have knocked Peter down. The bulking rugby player, about 6'3", all muscle, a member of the school's rugby team, expected an easy target. Instead, Peter's shoulder stung, and he staggered back 2 steps. "Are you fucking blind?" he snarled. He slapped the big kid sideways, nearly snapping his head, loosening several teeth. Not satisfied, Peter grabbed the kid's collar, slammed him against the wall, and drove his left fist into his stomach. Wah! The rugby player doubled over, dry heaved, then fell to his knees, gasping. "Next time, open your fucking eyes. If I catch you again, it won't be this easy." Peter spat, then walked away with the surrounding students staring, stunned. Peter felt great. The kid on the floor had been unlucky. Kneeling there, red-faced and humiliated, he considered crying. When he looked up and saw everyone mocking him, his eyes filled with tears. Xiao Ran shook his head at the spectacle and walked on to class. Inside, Peter sat down as if nothing had happened and started flipping through a comic book. When Xiao Ran came in, he greeted Gwen, who had arrived early and was reading. "Morning, Gwen." Gwen looked up, a rare, charming smile breaking her usually indifferent expression. "Morning, Xiao." The classmates nearby watched with curiosity. When had they gotten so close? Peter, who was reading a comic, peered over and whispered, "Xiao, when did you and Gwen get so chummy? She actually smiled at you." "My relationship with Gwen has always been fine," Xiao Ran replied, with a look that said, "You're only noticing now?" Peter rolled his eyes. Gwen, despite being a top student, always kept people at arm's length. She wasn't friendly with anyone. Peter leaned closer. "Do you have some secret for getting along with girls? Teach me." Xiao Ran blinked. "Who are you trying to use it on?" Peter hesitated, then leaned in and whispered into Xiao Ran's ear, "What do you think of the new teacher, Ms. Walma?" Xiao Ran stared. He'd seen Miss Walma yesterday, a woman in her 30s with a nice figure, but rough skin and a square face that didn't suit Eastern tastes. And Peter actually liked her? "You little, impressive taste," Xiao Ran said, giving him a thumbs up. Peter never failed to surprise him. "But didn't you like Mary Jane?" Xiao Ran probed. Peter rubbed his nose. "That's different. With Mary Jane, a nice car and she'll date you. Ms. Walma's different." Oh, so Peter wanted both. Xiao Ran couldn't help laughing. He idly taught Peter a few tips, short video tricks he'd seen in his previous life, about talking to older women. Whether they were accurate was another matter, but they sounded plausible, and Peter wrote everything down like it was gospel. At lunch, Gwen came over, curious. "Did you actually teach Peter that stuff?" "I saw it online. No idea if it'll work, but he'll give it a shot," Xiao Ran said with a smile. Gwen imagined Peter being bounced out of Miss Stay, Walma's office, and couldn't hide a malicious little laugh. "Want to have lunch together?" Gwen asked. Sure." They walked to the cafeteria. In the afternoon, during first period, Xiao Ran noticed Peter didn't have any obvious bruises. Presumably, he hadn't tried anything yet. But in second period, 2 police officers came into the classroom with the principal and took Peter away. Whispers spread. Had Peter committed a crime? Somebody mentioned he'd hit someone in the hallway that morning. Maybe it was connected to the infamous 3.4 incident. "Xiao, do you know what happened?" Gwen asked, leaning over. Xiao Ran nodded and told her about Peter hitting someone that morning. "You mean Peter hit Jeffrey?" Gwen exclaimed. "Yeah," Xiao Ran said. "Looks like Peter's hiding something too." He added that, given the way Gwen and Peter lacked any special telepathic connection, their spider-like powers didn't seem to come from a spider totem or spider god. They were more like the movie version, a result of genetic modification. "I can't believe Peter kept that from us," Gwen muttered, glancing at the empty seat. "He probably just got the ability recently." By the end of the day, Peter still hadn't returned. Xiao Ran figured he wouldn't be jailed forever, but he'd likely have to pay damages. Jeffrey had been badly beaten and had lost several teeth. Given Peter's family situation, coming up with the sum could be very hard. That turned out to be right. After being taken in and questioned, and considering Peter's normally good grades and honest demeanor, both sides agreed on a settlement. Peter would pay $7,200. If he refused, he could be jailed for months, maybe a year. Peter was furious. As he left the police station, his eyes burned with murder for Jeffrey and his father. In fact, he really did think about revenge. P.S. Third update is here. Chapter 92, Peter's Revenge, Night of Murder, Mitsuri's Special Treatment. That night, after a candlelit dinner with Gwen, Xiao Ran walked her home. Gwen, still sore from doing only 4 practice problems the day before, had vowed to beat Xiao Ran today and drain his endless problem bank. Unfortunately for her, Xiao Ran's problem bank seemed limitless. 3 years of college entrance exams and 5 years of mock tests had bounds, but Xiao Ran never ran out. They practiced until Gwen had solved 5 problems and then tapped out. "I can't anymore. Let's stop for today. I'll beat you tomorrow," she conceded, confident she'd improved. "All right, I'll cut you some slack," Xiao Ran teased. "I expected at least 6 when you bragged so much." Gwen glared playfully. Outside, it had started to rain. The drizzle turned to a heavy downpour with strong winds. Under a roadside tree, a lone figure stared coldly at a house across the street. Lightning split the sky, bathing everything in stark white light, and when it faded, the figure beneath the tree was gone. At Jeffrey's house that same night, the injured Jeffrey sat on the second floor, phone in hand, texting his girlfriend. "You should have seen Peter's face just now," he typed. It was absolutely priceless. Will he have to pay? That's $7,200. No compensation? Then he'll go to jail. I'm still surprised. Peter Parker used to be the one getting bullied at school, didn't he? If he's this strong, why was he ever picked on? Who knows? Maybe he was mentally ill. Jeffrey, texting his girlfriend, didn't notice that the unlocked window had quietly been opened and someone had slipped inside. The window slammed shut. His face was wrapped in bandages that covered even his ears. With the rain hammering on the roof, he didn't hear a thing. The figure at the bedside looked down at Jeffrey's phone, sneered, and murmured, "Yeah, the old me, maybe people were right to call him crazy." "What? Who's there?" Jeffrey's voice finally broke through, and he turned, only to find a large hand clamped around his neck. The intruder dragged him off the bed onto the floor, straddled him, and forced him down. "Jeffrey? Still awake?" the man said. "Why aren't you answering my messages? Talking to that bitch again?" He glanced at the screen, then grinned at Jeffrey, whose face was already swelling where the pressure cut off his air. "Want me to reply to her for you?" Jeffrey flailed, hands and feet slamming against the carpet. The storm outside was loud enough that his parents in the other room couldn't hear. The man in the mask suddenly freed a hand and tore the ski mask off his face. It was a face Jeffrey knew all too well. Peter Parker? The realization hit him like ice. He screamed in his head. "Yes, it's me," Peter said as if answering the thought. He smiled. "Surprised? Didn't expect it to be me? You demanded compensation from me at the police station earlier," he continued. "Did you think I wouldn't come after you? Did you look down on me, Peter Parker, and think I was a coward who would quietly pay up?" The pressure on Jeffrey's neck increased as Peter tightened his grip. Before Peter had even finished the sentence, Jeffrey's neck gave with a sickening crunch. He went limp, eyes frozen in an expression of eternal grievance. Peter stared at the body in front of him, annoyed. "Damn it, too fragile," he muttered, then cursed under his breath. He picked up the fallen phone and saw Jeffrey's girlfriend still firing off messages. Amused, he snapped a photo of Jeffrey's corpse, attached a message, "I'm coming for you tonight," and sent it. He tossed the phone back onto the bed, opened the door, and walked out. He hadn't forgotten why he'd come. He hadn't only come for Jeffrey. Jeffrey's father deserved it too. A few hours ago, Peter had been slapped by his uncle. The sting of that humiliation, getting blamed, beaten, and forced to pay when he finally fought back, had built into something he couldn't let go of. He wasn't going to take it out on family who had shown him any warmth. He was going to take it out on those who'd made him suffer. So he'd come here. His wet shoes squeaked on the carpet as he climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. He put a gloved hand on the doorknob and opened it. Henry Parker, reading the newspaper in bed, lowered it and gaped. "Peter Parker? What are you doing in my house? Get out!" As he reached for the bedside drawer where he kept a gun, Peter was already moving. He lunged forward, seized Henry's wrist with one hand, and closed his fingers around his throat with the other. Bones didn't stand a chance. With a sick crack, Henry's wrist snapped. He screamed as Peter lifted him, choking the breath from him. The commotion woke Jeffrey's mother, who had been medicated and groggy. Jesus! Henry, what on earth? She tore off her sleep mask and saw a young man choking her husband and lifting him off the mattress. "Good evening, ma'am," Peter said, grinning coldly. She screamed. Peter twisted Henry's neck until it broke. Then he grabbed the woman by the hair, slammed her to the floor, and stomped down on one of her legs. She writhed and crawled toward the door, pleading for help. Peter listened to her screams like a bitter sort of music. "I was so foolish," he murmured, thinking of his former self. "Stupid, but not anymore." He raised his foot and stomped hard, breaking her neck. Her head tilted at a grotesque angle. Peter let go, glanced at the two overturned bodies, and left the room. Downstairs, the wail of police sirens grew louder. Someone had called them. Peter paused on the first-floor landing long enough to listen. "You're too late," he sneered. He pulled his mask back over his face, ignored the house alarm that now screamed, and slipped out into the rain. Shortly after, police cars screeched to a stop in front of the house. Officers jumped out, faces grim as they saw the wide-open door and heard the piercing alarm. They moved in. Xiao Ran's residence. In the bedroom, Gwen lay asleep with Xiao Ran in her arms. He wasn't tired, but he let himself linger, thinking. He planned to rest for a while, return to the Zongman world, and come back tomorrow. He still didn't know who the mastermind was, and none of the other universe Spider-Men had shown up yet. He dealt with the 3 from this universe already. In theory, he only needed to defeat 13 more to meet the conditions for the clear achievement. So there was nothing left to do now but wait. Chapter 120, Section 120, Hurry up, don't make me wait too long. Xiao Ran thought to himself, then closed his eyes. After a moment, he fell asleep. Mihua Town, Xiao Ran's villa, second-floor bedroom. Xiao Ran opened his eyes. He was back. He glanced at Sonoko, still asleep beside him, and felt a flicker of strange guilt. In his memory, it had been Gwen lying there a second ago. The feeling vanished almost instantly. His professional ethics as a scoundrel wiped it away. They weren't even in the same world. What was there to feel guilty about? Not rushing to get up, Xiao Ran turned and hugged Sonoko, looking at her face closely. After a moment, he leaned over and kissed her cheek. Sonoko's eyebrows twitched, as if she might wake. Xiao Ran smiled and gently pinched her nose. "If you're awake, stop pretending. Get up. It's already 6 o'clock." Sonoko burrowed into his arms, muttering, "No way. I want to sleep until 6:30. "All right, I'll let you sleep another half hour," he said with a doting smile. She hugged him tight and closed her eyes, drifting off again. In truth, he wasn't really sleeping. If he actually fell asleep, he would immediately slip back into the American comic world. He only kept his eyes closed and used his super hearing to monitor sounds in the area. He picked up the neighbor making breakfast, always an early riser. Footsteps on the road, must be someone walking to school, getting an exercise. A couple arguing in the distance, a bad sign to start the day. Countless ambient noises flowed into his mind, processed by his super brain, neatly categorized. Half an hour passed. Before he could wake Sonoko, she stirred on her own. "Morning, Xiao Ran." She smiled and kissed him, then pulled the covers over his face and ran off laughing in bare feet. By the time he pulled the covers away, she was already dressed. "Big sleepyhead, get up," she teased, grabbing his hand and hauling him out of bed. "Who's the big sleepyhead, really?" he replied, flicking her nose. They held hands and went to the bathroom to wash. Yoko Okino in the next room didn't get up as early. When Xiao Ran went downstairs, he saw Kanroji Mitsuri practicing with her sword in the yard. "Mitsuri, time to eat," he called. "Coming," she replied, quickly sheathing her sword and hurrying over. "Are we going to the same snack street as yesterday?" What do you want to eat today?" "I want it all," Mitsuri declared, clenching her small fist with a triumphant grin. Xiao Ran just smiled inwardly, if it made her happy. At the snack street a short while later, Mitsuri's arms were already overflowing with bags. It was only her second visit, but the shopkeepers had clearly remembered the exceptionally cheerful girl and even gave her discounts today. Xiao Ran, who'd eaten on this street since childhood, had never gotten that kind of special treatment. Food lovers really are more popular with restaurant owners. Does Mitsurini eat that much? Sonoko asked, staring at the dozens of bags. Of course. Didn't you see my appetite last night? My stomach's a bottomless pit. Mitsuri boasted, all the old insecurities about her appetite gone. Is Mitsurini so strong because she eats so much? Sonoko asked curiously. Exactly, Mitsuri nodded. Sonoko considered whether she should eat more to get stronger, then abandoned the idea when Xiao Ran chimed in. Mitsuri's muscle density is 8 times that of an ordinary person, which is why her appetite is so large, he said. Oh. Sonoko brightened and immediately gave up imagining herself following Mitsuri's example. Mitsuri could eat a lot and still stay slim. If Sonoko did the same, she'd probably have to start dieting right away. Xiao Ran, Sonoko, and Ran had just finished serving their food when Miko waved at them from across the courtyard. The 3 of them walked over. Xiao Ran-kun, Sonoko, Ran, want to have lunch together? Miko called with a smile. Sure, Sonoko answered, pulling Xiao Ran and Ran to sit down. This is my friend Baihei Chuanhua, Miko introduced the girl sitting beside her. Xiaohua was already familiar with Xiao Ran. Xiaohua's approachable nature quickly won over Ran and Sonoko, and the 4 of them gabbed away about girlish things while Xiao Ran mostly focused on eating. Halfway through his meal, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He took it out and checked the caller ID. He was surprised the big star was calling him. He answered and put the phone to his ear. What's up, big star? So free you're calling me? Ai Hoshino's voice came back, huffy. Humph. It's because someone never calls me. Xiao Ai is so mad. Xiao Ran couldn't help smiling at the tone. You're a big star. I didn't want to disturb your work. It was a reasonable excuse. The truth was he'd had a lot going on the last few days, constantly slipping between the anime world and the American comic world, and he'd completely forgotten I had told him to call when he had time. If she hadn't called proactively today, he might have gone on forgetting for who knew how long. Humph. Excuses, she replied. In the RV where she'd just finished shooting a commercial, I was picking at a meager lunch. As an idol, she had to guard her figure. If fans started calling her names like Fat Pig Eye or Auntie Eye, that would be a blow she couldn't take.